So I will present Diamyd Medical today. It's a company with a very clear purpose or mission. The mission of the company is actually to cure type 1 diabetes, and that's been the mission ever since it was founded in the 90s. So we are still here, and it's looking pretty good. So and this clarity of purpose has really, I think that's kind of defines our company and why we are still here. We're persisting, and we have been in phase 3 in partnership with J&J. Back in the days, it was the largest partnership in Swedish biotech history. Fortunately, that phase 3 didn't work out. Regained all the rights to that therapeutic, and it's been under development since then. And now we've made some slight changes, and it's looking very good now. And I will primarily focus on that asset since we have limited time. But I will give you first a brief overview of what we're doing in the company, then show you some of the results, and there should be some time for questions as well. I'm sure you're very eager to ask questions. Since we're here at NASDAQ, this is very important, especially since we're in this building. So you need to do your homework. So what we are doing, we are focusing on especially type 1 diabetes, and that's our main focus now. Type 1 diabetes intervention, which means newly diagnosed type 1 diabetes. So when the patients are diagnosed, they go to the medical doctor because they have so many symptoms. And at diagnosis, they have only about 10 to 20% left of their own insulin production. And that will then eventually completely disappear because of an autoimmune attack on the beta cells, insulin-producing beta cells. Our primary purpose now is to re-educate the immune system using one of the main antigens in the disease, so one of the proteins that the immune system recognizes as foreign for some reason and attacks. And in that attack, since it's expressed on the beta cells, they destroy the T cells destroy the insulin-producing cells. But we use that protein as a vaccine, so we want to re-educate the immune system and sort of create a new immune reaction towards that protein, which is not inflammatory, and in that way slow down the disease progression, halt the disease progression, and eventually, hopefully, we can also turn the disease progression, at least for a few patients, that they can actually get off insulin and long-term really to cure the disease. So that's the first asset you see here on the left. That's the antigen-specific immunotherapeutic Diamyd. The antigen is GAD, which is one of the main antigens. And then we have a second asset also in clinical phase. It's called Remission. It's based on GABA, which is a cell signaling molecule. It's very known from the central nervous system, but past decade has shown that it seems to have a very central role also in the periphery, and especially in the pancreas, where it seems to serve also as a signaling molecule, which is important for insulin and glucagon release. And interestingly, preclinical studies, several groups in the world have shown that GABA can actually stimulate regeneration of insulin-producing cells. So we have two trials ongoing with GABA in type 1 diabetics, trying to see what kind of effects does it have in humans in order to take the next step after that and hopefully create a product that can help type 1 diabetics. We obviously see possibilities to also expand, so going to type 1 diabetes prevention. That's becoming, and that will probably become like an, let's say, FDA-approved indication, because today it's quite relatively easy to predict who will get type 1 diabetes by measuring autoantibodies in blood. If you have 2 autoantibodies in blood, you have an around 80% likelihood of getting type 1 diabetes within 5 years. So there are now ongoing trials in prevention, so looking at, and that's obviously we see effect in intervention space. Prevention is obviously the next step to go. We've already had a trial in prevention, actually. So safety-wise, it's no problem to have our asset down to healthy children of 3 years of age. And LADA, which is actually type 1 diabetes in adults. This is 10% of type 2 diabetics actually have type 1 diabetes. But they are today usually diagnosed as type 2 diabetics, and they're treated as type 2 diabetics. So they're mistreated. But this is where we see, like, this is a huge unmet medical need, and I think it's something that big pharma is also, they are realizing that there's something to do here. And during the recent conference in San Francisco, the ADA meeting, there was a session around this indication, which I think was an eye-opener for a lot of people. GAD is the driver in that disease, in that older type 1 diabetics, basically 100% GAD-driven disease. So we see that if you want to use an antigen, it's our antigen that you should use. Regeneration, obviously, that's both in type 1. We are now evaluating that. If it works, if we see some signals, that obviously is relevant for type 2 diabetes as well. And GABA has been shown to be anti-inflammatory as well, so that could be an additional avenue to pursue. But now all focus is on type 1 diabetes intervention and especially the antigen-specific immunotherapeutic, which is in phase 2b trials. Type 1 diabetes, it's a relatively large, it's not a rare disease, so the prevalence is around 40 million worldwide, and the incidence in children and adolescents is around more than 100,000. But for some reason, well, there's been insulin for 100 years, but there are no other actually pharmaceuticals approved for type 1 diabetes. There are devices, there are insulin pumps, there are continuous glucose monitors, but there are no disease-modifying agents on the market. And quite worrisome is that, but there's a recent Swedish registered study that shows that if you get the diagnosis before the age of 10, girls have on average an 18-year shorter lifespan, and boys a 14-year shorter lifespan. So there's a huge unmet medical need, which I don't think it's, when you think about diabetes, you hardly notice that some people are ill, but you forget about all these complications, both acute complications, long-term complications, that the current therapeutics and devices don't take care of these. And recent US data actually shows that despite better access to insulin pumps and continuous glucose monitors, the HbA1c, so the blood glucose values, have actually almost gone in the wrong direction. So patients have worse control today than they had 5 years ago, which really shows that the better devices don't really take care of the underlying problem. And obviously, significant healthcare costs are involved in this. The market is obviously large. It's an untapped market today because there are no other disease-modifying drugs out there. I think from our perspective, most importantly, we have a pretty good patent position, even if this protein was actually discovered and patented in the end of the 90s. We still have substance of matter until 2032 in the US. And we filed additional patents quite broadly in the world around the new mode of administering, which is we go now into the lymph nodes. And I will come back to that soon. It's a biologic, and we have an orphan designation in the US as well. And obviously for Remission, the GABA-based, it will go into the non-insulin market. And here we also have a patent in the US approved until 2031. And we have other pending patents that can give us additional protection. And it will follow one of these 505(b)(2) regulatory pathways in US, similar in Europe, which means it's a known compound. So you don't need to have the complete data package that you would have for a completely new molecule, which gives us the possibility to potentially move much faster to market with this one. How we are positioning ourselves, and this is then for Diamyd, the antigen therapeutic. So today in the red square you see the standard of care. And there are a number of things that are being developed. Either you have some drugs moving in from the type 2 field into type 1 as well. You have first versions of artificial pancreases are approved in the US. And then you have smart pens, insulin pens being developed. Where we are competing is more on the upper level. So there are some immunosuppressive treatments under development, so where you really suppress the whole immune system in order to reduce the inflammation on the beta cells, in that sense, try to rescue them. You have some cell therapies under development, and then you have, I would say, only a couple of antigen-specific technologies that have come as far as us. Well, it's us and another technology. We are the one that use GAD, the other one use insulin as the antigen. And we are in the upper right corner where you want to be. We created this slide, that's why we are there, but this is based on the potential to show really long-term effects and benefit for the patient, and also it's a simple and it's a safe treatment. So immunosuppressive treatments, they can have a really good effect, and there are some proof of concept now showing that they do have an effect in type 1 diabetes, but they require hospitalization and they have side effects. Our treatment is 3 injections. There's never been any serious adverse events, and the data show that it can have really long-term effects as well. So what's new in the asset has been developed for a long time now, and it has been in phase 3 and unfortunately failed then. But there have been quite clear signals that it works, and meta-analysis, when you pull together data from several different trials, show that it has a 98% likelihood of working. The difference what we are doing now, before the injection was subcutaneous, either 2, 3, or 4 injections. That didn't seem to get the required efficacy. So during the previous years, we've seen signals, and from one interesting small trial, which I will show results from, where you inject directly in the lymph node, a superficial lymph node in the groin area. That comes from the allergy field, because there they've shown that rather than doing subcutaneous injections over 2 to 3 years, I mean, allergen-specific immunotherapeutics, they work. They've been basically decades on the market. But rather than doing subcutaneous over 2 or 3 years, escalating doses, it's enough with 3 injections in the lymph node and you get the same efficacy. So we tried the same thing in type 1 diabetics, and it really seems to work much better. So both the clinical response seems very promising and the immunological response seems to be very promising. The reason here, well, one of the main reasons, it's probably a dose effect. When you go subcutaneous with a big particle, it stays in the skin, and it needs to be picked up by the dendritic cells and transported to the lymph nodes. So when you obviously inject directly in the lymph node, you get all of the protein where it should be and where you have all the dendritic cells that pick it up and then present it to the T cells. So some results. This is partial remission, so it's a compound variable. You look at how much insulin the patients are using and how well they are controlled, their blood glucose are controlled. Usually after, when you're diagnosed, you're put immediately on insulin therapy, basically not to die. And that gives some temporary relief to the beta cells, so they start producing a bit more insulin. And about 60% of patients go into partial remission in the beginning. But that doesn't last long, so after 1 to 2 years, it's around 20% only of patients are in this partial remission, and it continues downwards. Our patients, so 12 patients, when they go into our trial around 3 months from diagnosis, again, 60% of them were in partial remission. After 15 months, when all 12 patients have been followed, 11 out of 12 are in partial remission. The 7 patients have been followed so far for 30 months. The 7 are in partial remission. 3 additional patients have received a booster injection at around 32 months post-baseline, and they're also in partial remission. So this is obviously quite promising. And looking at the most, let's say from a regulatory perspective, the most important variable is C-peptide, the body's own ability to produce insulin. That's the primary endpoint in these studies. And usually over a 15-month period, you decrease by 40 to 50% in this age population of patients. Our 12 patients have gone down around 18% at 15 months. The 7 patients that have been followed for 30 months have gone down less than 30%. And very interestingly, even if it's only 3 patients, but the ones that received a booster injection at around 32 months, they've actually, all 3 of them have increased in insulin production, which is very rare. I have never seen this. So this really opens up the possibility that we are not only slowing down the disease progression, there's actually potential to at least halt the disease progression, and for some super responder patients, we could actually turn the disease progression, and maybe long-term with additional boosters, we could get them maybe off insulin as well. So that's a really nice finding, and given the safety in this compound, since it's been in trials with more than 1,200 patients so far, never any serious adverse events, this really opens up the possibility to give the 3 initial injections, and then you have annual boosters maybe, and you can keep treating the patients and hopefully maybe curing some of them. We are also lowering blood glucose, so HbA1c, which is the average blood glucose over a 2-3 week period. Normally, you see a gradual increase in blood glucose. It's more and more difficult for patients to actually handle the disease. But in our trial, we see that they go down from baseline and they actually stay down at 15 months, 30 months, and at 36 months. And finally, we also see that our patients, they are not increasing drastically in insulin dose, which you usually see. The less of an insulin-producing capacity the body has, the more insulin you need to inject in order to control your blood sugars. So our patients, they go down from baseline and they stay around baseline levels still at 15 months, at 30 months, and at 37 months. So we are hitting all of the main clinical parameters, which is very rare. It's almost never been seen with similar kind of or anything else that has been tried out in type 1 diabetes. And like I mentioned, I don't have a picture of it, but from the immunologically, it also looks very promising. So what we are seeing is, we are seeing, first of all, an activation. When we look at the antigen-specific immune response, first when we inject, we activate the immune system. But after the third injection, so the 2 first injections seem to activate, but the third injection, what happens then is that we see a decrease in T cells, so effector cell proliferation and activation. And we also see a subclass switching on the antibody side. And long-term, at 15 months, we see IL-10, which is a regulatory cytokine that starts to is secreted. So everything points to a mechanism where you see an activation first, which goes into more something immunomodulation, and then long-term something that resembles tolerance against this antigen. And very similar mechanisms have been seen in the allergy field when that correlates to clinical response. So you really see that there's a subclass switching on the antigen side, and you also see IL-10 popping up late at long term, and that correlates to clinical response. Finally, our pipeline. So we have 2 trials ongoing with Diamyd, the antigen therapy. Diamyd 1, which I showed results from, that will still have 30-month results coming out beginning of next year. We will also have 11-month follow-up on the booster patients, 3 booster patients, and additional immunology will also be coming. And then we have a fully recruited phase 2b trial. It was fully recruited in May. It will read out 3rd quarter next year. And the aim here for us is, given the high unmet medical need, large data safety package we have with Diamyd, we will evaluate the possibility to go for conditional marketing approval in Europe, which means that if the readout is very strong from the Diamyd 2, there could be a possibility that we could file for marketing approval and do the phase 3 post factum to then get the full marketing approval once that's finished. And then on Remission side, there are two trials, one in the US, which will come some preliminary results quite soon at the ASD conference, and then a bit later this year, beginning next year, we will have more full results in immunology as well. And that's then with placebo control. It's with GABA as a food supplement, then the same active ingredient, but it's a food supplement version, and also in combination with the vaccine, but then it's subcutaneously administered. And then we have our own formulation of GABA Remission, which is in a phase 1b/2a trial with a dose escalation part, which will be finished during the autumn, and then an effect part, which will start after that, where we're also combining with a receptor modulator to see if we can additionally enhance the effects. And those 2 trials will be important to see, well, if it works, how does it seem to work in humans, so that we can take the next step and really what is the final product that we are pursuing here. And I don't have a picture here, but we also have the great privilege of working with some of the really key opinion leaders in this field. And late last year, Mark Atkinson, who's a professor in Florida, joined our board. And he's one of the really top key opinion leaders in the whole world. He's been involved with the company for a long time in the scientific advisory board. He was one of the original inventors of the protein as well. And now he's on the company board as well, which is a huge support for us as well. And we have other really driven researchers we are working with. Very fortunate to do that. If you have any other, well, you find a lot of information on our webpage, and obviously quarterly reports, cash end of May, 70 million Swedish, burn rate around 3.5 million per month. So we have cash until the readout and after the readout as well next year. Thank you.